The room was silent, save for the soft hum of the streetlights outside. A blood-stained letter lay on the floor, its crimson ink streaked across the delicate paper, as if someone had clutched it too tightly in panic. The camera zoomed out slowly, revealing the grim scene in its entirety, a disheveled room with overturned furniture and broken glass scattered across the hardwood floor. Distant sirens wailed in the background, their echoing sound filling the emptiness. The harsh, cold light from a single street lamp outside cut through the window, casting long shadows on the walls. She was the last person to see him alive, but she couldn't even remember the night. What had happened? Where was he? What did the letter mean? These questions rang in her head as her fingers trembled, afraid to touch anything. The night was still young, yet the darkness inside this room seemed eternal. The truth somewhere in this mess was just out of reach. Sarah stood at the doorway, staring into the room she'd never thought she'd have to enter again. Her fingers brushed the doorframe, feeling the chill of the wood beneath her touch. The stillness was deafening. She didn't want to go in. She didn't want to face what lay inside. But she had no choice. The police had already been here, their presence lingering like a bad memory. She was supposed to stay away, to leave it all behind. But she couldn't. Not now. Not after everything. As her eyes scanned the room, her heart pounded in her chest. The letter, with its blood-stained message, seemed to mock her, daring her to uncover the truth. The truth that she wasn't sure she wanted to find. As Sarah stepped into the room, her breath caught in her throat. The blood-stained letter lay untouched on the floor, its significance growing with each passing second. Her eyes moved to the shattered window, then to the overturned furniture. It was as if the chaos was frozen in time, each broken piece a symbol of a moment that had spiraled out of control. She hesitated before stepping forward, her feet feeling like lead as they moved toward the letter. She crouched down, reaching out for it, but as her hand hovered above the paper, a sudden distant sound from outside made her pause. Her heart raced. What was that noise? She stood up quickly, her eyes darting toward the window. There was something out there, something moving in the shadows. Her hand trembled as it hovered above the letter, the cold air making her fingers stiff. The silence was unbearable, and every little sound, no matter how faint, sent her heart racing. She couldn't ignore it any longer. She had to know what the letter said. She slowly lowered her hand, fingertips brushing the paper. It was warm, warm from the blood that had soaked through it. She lifted it slowly, her eyes scanning the messy scrawl. The words blurred in front of her as her vision swam with panic. Her breath was shallow. "I know what you saw." That was all it said, but that was enough. She dropped the letter like it had burned her, her body jerking back in fear. Her mind raced. What did it mean? She stepped back, the weight of the letter in her hands too much to bear. The world around her seemed to tilt, her surroundings blurring as her mind raced. She felt dizzy, disoriented, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her. She turned her gaze toward the door. The room felt colder now, the shadows deeper, as if the walls themselves were closing in. Her fingers clenched around the letter, a small, insignificant piece of paper that had become the key to everything. She couldn't stay here any longer. She had to leave, but she couldn't shake the fear that followed her. Was she being watched? The feeling lingered, unsettling and persistent. Sarah sat at her kitchen table, the letter from the night before now resting in front of her, the bloodstains still vivid against the paper. The morning light filtered in through the window, but it did little to dispel the dark thoughts clouding her mind. She had always been a curious person, but this was different. The mystery of Jake's disappearance, the strange message on the letter, and the sense of danger lingering in the air, it was all too much. She had to face the truth, but she wasn't sure she was ready for it. The sirens she had heard the previous night were still echoing in her head, a constant reminder of the night she could barely remember. She stared at the letter again, trying to decipher its meaning, but the more she thought about it, the more confusing it became. Who was this letter really for? And why was she the one holding it now? The only thing she was sure of was that it had something to do with Jake. And it was pulling her deeper into a situation she couldn't control. The sound of her phone ringing broke the silence, and Sarah jumped, startled. She quickly picked it up, hoping it wasn't a reminder of the past she was trying to escape. "Sarah," the voice on the other end said, its tone urgent, "you need to come down here, now." The voice was familiar, but something about the tone made her stomach tighten. It wasn't a request. It was a command. She had heard it before in moments of panic, when things had gone wrong. Sarah stood up, her legs trembling slightly as she gripped the phone tighter. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The line went quiet for a moment. "Just get here," the voice said. She didn't need to hear anything else. The urgency in their tone told her all she needed to know. Something was happening. Something she wasn't prepared for. She arrived at the location just minutes later, her mind racing with possibilities. The building was unmarked, standing alone in the middle of a run-down block of buildings. The lights inside were dim, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. Sarah hesitated at the door, unsure if she was walking into a trap. But her feet moved forward, the need for answers outweighing her fear. She pushed open the door, which creaked on its hinges, revealing a dark room inside. As her eyes adjusted to the dim light, she saw a figure standing in the far corner, their face obscured by shadows. They didn't move as she entered. "You came," a voice said, cold and calm. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. She wasn't alone in this anymore. The figure stepped forward slowly, and Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The dim light revealed a face she hadn't expected to see, Jake's. But there was something different about him now. He looked different. Harder. More dangerous. His eyes, once warm and familiar, were now cold and distant. "What's going on?" Sarah asked, her voice shaking. Jake didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "You shouldn't have come," he finally said, his voice low and menacing. "You don't know what you're dealing with." The words sent a chill down Sarah's spine. She wanted to run, to escape from this nightmare, but something kept her rooted to the spot. This wasn't the brother she remembered. This was someone else, someone she didn't recognize. Sarah took a step back, her mind spinning. "Jake, what's happening? What are you involved in?" she demanded. Her voice was shaky, but she couldn't stop herself. She had to know. The man in front of her was her brother, but the person standing there now was a stranger. Jake's gaze softened for just a moment, a flicker of recognition passing through his eyes. But then it was gone, replaced by something darker. "You're too deep in this now," he said, his voice low and urgent. "You need to leave before it's too late." His words were like a warning, a plea. But Sarah wasn't ready to back down. She wasn't going to walk away without the truth. "I'm not leaving, Jake. Not until I know what's going on." Jake's eyes hardened once more, and he took a step closer, his body language tense and threatening. "You should have stayed away," he whispered. The words hung in the air like a deadly promise. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something crucial. The more she thought about the cryptic letter, the more the pieces of the puzzle didn't seem to fit. Jake's words, the sudden change in his demeanor, it all felt like part of a bigger picture, but she couldn't see it clearly. She spent the next few days trying to piece together the fragments of her memories, the hours spent with him before everything went wrong. The house felt like a prison, every shadow and creaking floorboard amplifying her unease. She had tried reaching out to old friends, hoping they could give her some answers, but each one seemed to avoid her calls, leaving her feeling more isolated than ever. The phone call from Jake's old friend, though, had sparked something, an idea that led her to a lead. The same name kept coming up in conversations, someone linked to the events that had unfolded around Jake. Her next step was clear. She had to find out who this person was. But what would she discover? Her search took her to a small, run-down bar on the outskirts of town. I'm the betrayal. The neon sign outside flickered, casting an eerie glow on the sidewalk. The bartender, an older man with a weathered face, gave her a long, assessing look as she stepped inside. She didn't belong here, and he knew it. The place was quiet, save for the soft hum of a jukebox in the corner. Sarah approached the bar, her footsteps echoing in the emptiness. "You looking for someone?" the bartender asked, his voice low and gravelly. She hesitated before responding. "I'm looking for someone who used to know Jake." The man raised an eyebrow, but didn't speak for a moment. Finally, he nodded, wiping the counter. "Yeah, I know him. But you might want to be careful. People who ask about Jake don't always leave in one piece." Sarah's heart skipped a beat, but she wasn't about to back down. Not now. The bartender finally leaned in closer, lowering his voice. "Jake got into something deep, something he couldn't get out of, not the kind of thing you want to get involved with." Sarah's pulse quickened as she listened, her fingers tightening around the edge of the bar. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He glanced over his shoulder, making sure no one else was listening, then leaned in even closer. "The guys he was mixed up with, they deal in things you wouldn't want to know about. You don't come back from that, Sarah. And Jake, he didn't want to either." The bartender's words hung in the air, leaving a bitter taste in Sarah's mouth. She could feel the walls closing in around her. Jake wasn't just missing, he was in danger. The truth was darker than she had imagined. "Where can I find them?" she asked, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. The bartender gave her a hesitant look before speaking again. "There's a warehouse down by the docks. But don't say I didn't warn you." He pushed a piece of paper across the bar with an address scribbled on it. Sarah grabbed it quickly, her heart pounding in her chest. "Thank you," she said before turning and walking out of the bar, the weight of what she was about to do settling on her shoulders. She had to know the truth. And she wasn't afraid anymore. The address led her to the outskirts of town, to a dilapidated building that looked abandoned at first glance. The area was eerily quiet, save for the occasional screech of a seagull in the distance. She approached the building cautiously, her footsteps muted by the thick fog rolling in from the water. She paused at the door, staring at the cracked wood and rusted hinges. This was it. The final step. But as she reached for the door, a sound behind her made her freeze. Before Sarah could touch the door, a figure emerged from the shadows, blocking her path. Her breath caught in her throat as she recognized the silhouette. "Jake," she whispered. He stood there, his face partially obscured by a hood, his expression unreadable. "You shouldn't have come here, Sarah," he said, his voice cold and distant. She took a step back, her heart racing. "I need to know the truth," she replied, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. Jake didn't move, his eyes locked on hers, filled with a mixture of sorrow and regret. "You're better off not knowing," he said softly. "The people I'm involved with, they'll do anything to keep their secrets. And now, you're involved too." The words hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. She had always known Jake to be reckless, but this was something else. Something darker. "What have you done?" she asked, her voice breaking as she stepped closer. Jake's eyes softened for a brief moment, before he turned and disappeared into the shadows, leaving her standing alone at the threshold of the warehouse. Sarah stood frozen at the entrance of the warehouse, the fog swirling around her feet like a living thing. Jake's sudden appearance and cryptic warning left her feeling more lost than ever. The words "you're involved too" echoed in her mind as she watched him disappear into the darkness. She had followed this trail for too long to turn back now. The answers she sought were inside, hidden somewhere within this decaying building. With her heart pounding, she stepped forward and pushed the door open. The hinges groaned in protest, and a rush of stale air hit her face. The inside was dim, with only the faint glow of distant streetlights seeping through broken windows. The scent of mildew and rust filled her nose as her footsteps echoed through the empty space. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. Her fingers trembled as she pulled her phone from her pocket, the screen illuminating her face. There were no calls, no messages. It was just her, alone in this maze of secrets. Every creak of the building made her more uneasy, but she pressed on. She had to find Jake. She had to know what was happening. As Sarah ventured deeper into the warehouse, she could hear the soft sound of dripping water somewhere in the distance, the echoes bouncing off the steel walls. The air felt thick, almost suffocating, as if the building itself was alive with hidden intentions. She moved cautiously, her eyes darting from one corner to the next, expecting someone to jump out at her. It wasn't long before she saw something ahead, a shape in the shadows. She froze. Her heart pounded in her chest. Was it Jake? Or someone else? Slowly, she took a step forward. The figure didn't move, and for a moment Sarah thought she imagined it. But as she approached, the shape became clearer. It was a man, standing with his back to her. He didn't appear to be aware of her presence. She took another step, closer now. The man's features were indistinct, but the feeling of dread in Sarah's gut intensified. She had to know who this person was, and why they were here. "Jake?" Sarah called out softly, her voice trembling in the vast silent space. The figure turned slowly, and for a moment Sarah thought it might be him. But as the figure came into the light, her stomach dropped. It wasn't Jake. The man's face was hard and unfamiliar, his expression cold. His eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Then, without saying a word, the man stepped forward, blocking Sarah's path. She instinctively took a step back, her heart racing. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice firmer than she felt. The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he tilted his head, studying her with a calculating gaze. "You shouldn't have come here," he finally said, his voice low and menacing. "You don't know what you're dealing with." The words sent a chill down Sarah's spine. She knew she was in over her head. But she wasn't backing down. Not now. Not after everything. Sarah took a deep breath, her fear fueling her anger. "What do you know about Jake?" she demanded, her eyes never leaving the man's. He smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was a cruel, knowing grin, as though he had been waiting for her to ask that very question. "Jake," he said, his voice dripping with contempt, "'tisn't the person you think he is." His words hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. She had suspected as much, but hearing it out loud felt like a betrayal. "He's involved in things you can't even begin to understand," the man continued. "And now, you're tangled up in it too." The realization hit her hard. Jake wasn't just missing. He was hiding from something much bigger, something darker. And she had unknowingly walked right into its grip. Her hands clenched into fists. "Where is he?" she asked, her voice unwavering. The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped closer, lowering his voice. "If you want to find him, you'll have to face the truth. Are you ready for that?" Sarah hesitated for only a moment before answering, her words steady. "Yes." The man stepped aside, motioning toward a dark hallway leading deeper into the warehouse. "Follow me," he said, his tone now almost casual. But Sarah knew that this was no simple request. He was leading her into something she couldn't escape from, no matter how hard she tried. But she couldn't turn back now. She had to know the truth. She had to find Jake. As they moved through the warehouse, the sounds of their footsteps echoed off the steel walls, amplifying the silence that surrounded them. The building felt like it was closing in on her, the air growing colder with each step. They stopped in front of a metal door, its surface scratched and rusted from years of neglect. The man knocked 3 times, and the door creaked open. Behind it, a dimly lit room was revealed. Inside, Sarah saw something that made her blood run cold. A table covered with documents, photos of Jake, and what looked like a map. The pieces were finally starting to fall into place. The room was cold, the air thick with the weight of secrets. Sarah stood at the edge of the table, staring down at the scattered documents. Her heart raced as she tried to make sense of the pictures and the map that lay before her. She picked up one of the photos, her fingers trembling. It was a picture of Jake, but not the Jake she knew. His eyes were hard, distant. He was standing with a group of men, all of them dressed in dark suits. The photo had been taken somewhere deep in the city, in a place Sarah didn't recognize. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. The man behind her watched her closely, his expression unreadable. "This is what Jake got involved in," he said simply. "A world you don't belong to." Sarah dropped the photo, her mind racing with questions. Who were these men? What had Jake done? She couldn't deny it any longer. Jake had become part of something dangerous, something much bigger than she had ever imagined. And now she was caught in the middle of it. Sarah's mind was spinning. She couldn't stop thinking about the photo of Jake with the other men. Who were they? What had he gotten himself into? The man's words kept repeating in her head, "A world you don't belong to." She turned to him, her voice shaking with urgency. "I need answers," she demanded. He hesitated before responding, his eyes flicking to the door behind her. "Answers? You won't find them here," he said quietly. "But if you want to find Jake, you need to leave, now." His tone was sharp, warning her that staying any longer was dangerous. But Sarah didn't know how to leave. Not yet. She couldn't walk away without the truth, even if it meant putting herself at risk. "I'm not leaving," she said, her voice steady now. "Not until I know what happened to him." The man sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Then you're more stubborn than I thought," he muttered, turning toward the door. "Fine, follow me." They moved quickly through the warehouse, the man leading the way through narrow corridors and past dark rooms. The silence between them was heavy, both of them aware of the danger that surrounded them. Sarah's mind raced with questions, but she didn't dare speak. She had to stay focused. She had to find Jake, and she couldn't afford to get distracted. Finally, they reached a steel door at the far end of the building. The man paused in front of it, glancing at Sarah. "This is where it all ends," he said quietly, as if preparing her for something terrible. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Sarah nodded without hesitation. "I have to know." The man sighed and nodded in return, then pushed the door open. The room beyond was dimly lit, the walls lined with filing cabinets and equipment. In the center, Jake was standing with his back to them, his body tense. As the door creaked open, he turned, his expression unreadable. Jake's eyes met Sarah's, and for a moment, the world seemed to stop. His expression was cold, but there was a flicker of something else, something deeper, more conflicted. Sarah's heart pounded as she stepped forward. "Jake," she whispered, her voice breaking. "What happened? Where have you been?" Jake didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a step back, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "You shouldn't have come," he said finally, his voice harsh. "You don't understand. I understand more than you think," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. "I know you're involved in something dangerous. I just don't know what." Jake's eyes darkened, and for a split second it seemed like he might speak, but then he turned away, his back to her once more. "You don't need to know," he muttered. "It's too late." Sarah's mind raced. What did that mean? Was it really too late? Was there no turning back? Jake's words echoed in Sarah's mind as she stood there, helpless. "It's too late." The phrase repeated over and over, each time making her feel more trapped. She had come so far, and yet it felt like she was losing him all over again. But she couldn't give up now. She had to find a way to reach him. "Jake, please," she said softly, taking another step toward him. "You can still get out. We can fix this." Jake turned slowly, his eyes narrowing. "No," he said, his voice cold. "It's done. There's no going back." The words stung, but Sarah didn't back down. "I won't stop until I know the truth," she said firmly. Jake's gaze flickered for a moment, and for the first time, she saw a crack in his resolve. But before she could say anything more, the door behind them slammed shut, and a voice echoed through the room. "It's time." Sarah's heart sank. They weren't alone anymore. The room fell silent, the heavy air thick with tension. Sarah's pulse raced as the figure in the doorway stepped forward, the faint sound of their boots echoing against the cold concrete floor. She couldn't see their face clearly, but the outline of their body, a tall figure dressed in dark clothing, was unmistakable. Jake's back was still turned, his body rigid. The man in the doorway seemed to hold an aura of authority, his presence commanding the room, as though he had the power to crush everything. "It's time," the man said, his voice low and deep, carrying an unsettling calmness. The words sent a chill down Sarah's spine. She knew, with a sickening certainty, that this wasn't just a meeting. It was the beginning of something much darker. The man was here to take control, to move things into a place from which they might never return. Sarah took a shaky step forward, her voice trembling but firm. "What are you doing with him?" she demanded. The man didn't answer immediately. He merely glanced at her, his eyes hidden beneath the shadows of his hood. The man's voice broke the silence again, low and laced with a warning. "You don't belong here, Sarah. This is bigger than you, bigger than anything you can understand." His words struck Sarah like a blow, making her stomach twist in knots. She had heard hints of danger before, but now, standing before this unknown figure, the magnitude of the situation became clear. Jake was tangled up in something she couldn't even begin to fathom, and she was too far in to back out now. "I'm not leaving," Sarah said, her voice stronger than she felt. "I'm not running from the truth anymore." The man's lips twisted into a faint, almost mocking smile, and he stepped further into the room, closing the distance between them. "The truth will consume you," he warned, his voice dropping to a whisper. "There's no escape from it once you know." Sarah's heart raced. She was already in too deep, and now there was no turning back. Jake's voice broke through the heavy silence, his words barely audible as they escaped from his lips. "You shouldn't have come, Sarah." His voice was distant, hollow. Sarah's heart sank at the sound of it. This wasn't the brother she remembered. He had changed, and the man in front of her seemed to have pulled him even further away. Sarah reached out, desperate to connect, to pull him back from whatever darkness had consumed him. "Jake, please," she pleaded. "Tell me what's going on. What have you done?" Jake's eyes flickered to her for the briefest moment, but the look in his eyes was not one of recognition. Instead, it was something colder. Something resigned. "You don't want to know, Sarah," he muttered. "You don't know what you're asking for." His words were like daggers, each one piercing through her heart. The man in the doorway stepped forward again, as though to seal the distance between Sarah and Jake. "You've heard enough," he said, his voice low and final. The man stepped closer to Sarah, his presence overwhelming. "You have no idea what you've walked into, do you?" he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This isn't some petty family drama, Sarah. This is bigger than anything you can imagine. You're out of your depth." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean? What's happening? Why is Jake involved in this?" she asked, her voice cracking with the weight of her fear. The man smiled, but it wasn't a smile that comforted her. It was a smile that spoke of things she could never understand. "Jake chose this path," he said softly. "And now, you're part of it too." The words echoed in the room, hanging in the air like a death sentence. Sarah felt a chill creep down her spine. There was no escaping it now. She was in it, whether she wanted to be or not. And the truth, whatever it was, would consume them all. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from behind them, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps approaching. Sarah spun around, her heart pounding in her chest. A group of men, dressed in dark suits, appeared in the doorway. Their faces were grim, their eyes focused and determined. One of them stepped forward, his gaze locking with the man in the room. "It's time," he said flatly. Sarah's eyes darted between the two men. She didn't understand. What was going on? The man in the room nodded once, his expression unreadable. He turned to Sarah, his eyes cold. "It's too late for questions," he said quietly. "You're already in this." The men behind him moved into the room, and Sarah instinctively took a step back. The air grew even colder, the room feeling even more suffocating as the realization dawned on her. There was no way out now. The walls were closing in. The air was thick with the weight of everything Sarah had learned. The men in suits moved around the room with cold precision, their eyes constantly scanning the shadows, as if the answers lay hidden somewhere within the walls. Jake stood silently, his face unreadable, a ghost of the brother she had once known. She had come so far, but it felt like the end of the line. The truth was darker than she could have ever imagined, and now she stood at the precipice of it all. The man who had been leading her through this nightmare walked over to the dimly lit corner of the room, his expression hard. "You need to decide, Sarah," he said quietly, not looking at her but sensing her every move. "Do you want the truth, or do you want to walk away from it all?" His question hung in the air, and Sarah could feel it sinking into her chest, a heaviness she couldn't escape. She wasn't sure anymore what the truth would bring. Would it free her or destroy everything she had left? Sarah's mind raced, her thoughts a blur of images and emotions. The truth, the darkness, the danger. It was all tangled together, and she didn't know where to begin. She turned toward Jake, her eyes pleading. "Jake, please," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "What happened to you? What is this?" Jake didn't answer. He didn't even look up. The silence stretched between them, suffocating her. She had never seen him like this, so lost, so unreachable. She reached for him, but the moment her fingers grazed his arm, he flinched away as though her touch burned him. "Jake!" she shouted, her voice trembling. "Why won't you talk to me?" His eyes finally met hers, but they were empty, no recognition, no warmth, just cold detachment. "It's too late, Sarah," he murmured. "I've made my choices." His words hit her like a slap, leaving her breathless. The distance between them felt insurmountable, a gulf too wide to cross. The man who had been speaking to Sarah earlier stepped forward, his cold gaze resting on her. "You still don't understand, do you?" he said, his voice carrying an air of finality. "Jake is not the person you knew anymore. He made a choice, and now you have to live with it." Sarah felt a cold shiver run down her spine as the realization hit her. "What choice? What are you talking about?" she demanded, her voice breaking. The man looked at her with pity, as though he were speaking to someone who couldn't grasp the gravity of the situation. "Jake's involved in something much bigger than you can fathom, and now you're involved too. There's no going back." Sarah's head swam with the weight of his words, but a part of her refused to accept it. "No," she said, shaking her head. "I won't believe that." The man's expression darkened. "You don't have to believe it. The truth doesn't care what you believe." Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as the man's words echoed in her mind. She looked at Jake one more time, her eyes searching for any trace of the brother she once knew. But there was nothing. He was gone, swallowed by a darkness that seemed beyond reach. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides, and she felt an overwhelming surge of emotion. Anger, sadness, fear, everything crashed into her at once. "I won't let you do this," she said through gritted teeth. "I won't let you control him." The man gave a dark chuckle. "You never had control, Sarah," he said softly. "Not over him, not over this. It's too late." The words hit her like a blow to the chest. She had come so far, only to discover that everything she thought she knew was a lie. The man stepped closer to her, his shadow falling over her. "You can walk away now," he said, his voice low and persuasive. "You don't have to be a part of this anymore." But Sarah wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. She shook her head. "No, I'm not walking away," she said, her voice steady. "I'm staying until I know the truth." Sarah stood at the edge of the cliff, the wind whipping around her, carrying with it the distant sounds of sirens. Her heart still raced, but there was a strange calm in the air now, as though everything had led her to this moment. Behind her, the events of the past few days felt like a distant nightmare, a blur of faces, words, and emotions. But here, on the precipice of everything, Sarah understood the hardest truth. Surviving was never about winning. It was about living with the consequences. She had fought for answers, for her brother, for the truth, but in the end, the truth had a cost. And now, she was left to pick up the pieces of everything she had lost. She could hear the faint sound of approaching sirens, but it didn't matter anymore. The truth was out, and no one could take it back. "The hardest part of surviving," Sarah whispered to herself, her voice barely audible over the wind. "Living with the truth."